this tutorial, we're using Adventure Creator to make an adventure game that can be found right here. And we're using Final IK so the player can interact with objects in the world. So if I want to pick up the sword, the animation between the player picking that item up is being handled by Final IK. So if I want to pick up any of the items here, like the helmet, the player's going to reach out and pick that up. And that's being animated by Final IK because it's determining where the object is in the world, and then it's telling the human mechanism character here to reach out and pick up that item. So for example, if I pick up on the lamp and I go into the scene view, you'll see that he reaches out, picks that item up, and the lamp is now in his hand. So this is using, of course, Adventure Creator and Final IK. Final IK is handling the procedural animation of the humanoid character so that he can interact naturally with objects in the world. Now what we're going to do in this tutorial is create a custom action. Adventure Creator has the action system here, and we're going to script a custom action so that it works with Final IK, and then we can use that action to make the player interact with these items. So to follow this tutorial, you should understand the basics of Adventure Creator and Final IK, but just the basics, and if there's something that I'm referring to that doesn't make sense, like an action, then just go through the basics of Adventure Creator and Final IK, and you should have no problem following along. To get started, what I've done is I've added onto the player, of course he has the mechanism animator, rigid body, and a collider, and the player script from Adventure Creator also has a hotspot script, so the player can be clicked on. For example, the sword, you could click the sword on the player to equip it, and it also has the interaction system from Final IK. So the interaction system itself I've put on the player, and of course he has the full body biped IK and a look at IK. Now that's how the player set up, and the interaction system again is on the player himself. That's going to be important when we are scripting the action. So for an object itself, like the helmet, we have already set up, of course, the hotspot, and it's using an action here. We'll get into that later, but we've set up the interaction object and position weight. Again, this is, if you don't understand how to set this up, go through the basic tutorial of the interaction system from Final IK, and you'll understand how to do that. Of course, what you would be doing at that point is calling this function interaction system.start interaction, and that's how you would call this interaction. So instead of calling this line of code right here to start our action, we're going to move this into an Adventure Creator action itself. So go ahead and set up your scene the same. Add an interaction system. I've put mine on the player, but we'll handle the situation where you don't want to do that. And but the basics that you need, of course, is the Adventure Creator player, an interaction system from Final IK, and an object with the interaction object. And once you have that basic setup and you're able to call this line of code and it works, then we're ready to create the custom action. Now to create the custom action, I'm going to go to the Adventure Creator website and go to the Home Tutorials, Third-Party Tools, and Customization, Writing a Custom Action. Now this tutorial is just going to show us how to do it. I'm not going to go through all the text. Definitely follow through this to learn how it works. But I'm just going to be doing the real basics. So we're going to go to the script action template.cs, which is at scripts action list. And so we need to get the Adventure Creator scripts action list. And in here, there is an action template. And it says to duplicate this. And we're going to have errors because we need to name it. So the name for theirs was action gravity. And what we'll name ours is action final IK. And I want to name this the same as the function that we're calling, which is start interaction. Because the function that we're calling it is here, start interaction. And that is the name that I'm going to use for the action final IK start interaction. Now we need to open up this script. And that name that we're using, which is final IK start interaction, action final IK start interaction, that needs to be replaced here and here. That's line 23 and 29. Okay, so now that we've replaced those two lines, we're going to move forward and open up the script. We need to go to line 32 to 34 and to give it a title. So let's go ahead and go to 32, and it's in the action category custom. We can change this enum if we want to, but I'm just going to leave it in custom. And the title will be final IK start interaction. And the description, and for the description I just said this calls the final IK start interaction function. We'll probably add a little bit more info to that later. And the next part of the adventure creator tutorial, now that we've given it a title and description, is that we have to go to line 27 and define the public variables that we need. So let's go over here to line 27, and we need to add public variables for all the variables that we need. Now if I go to see the API reference for the interaction system, which is right here, and we look at the start interaction, we can see that we need a full body biped effector, an interaction object, and a Boolean interrupt. And those are in reference to the interaction system, the object to interact with, and if the interrupt is true, interactions can be called before the current interaction has finished. So we're definitely going to need three variables, those three variables there. So in our script, let's go ahead and define a couple public variables. We're going to make a game object, and we'll call this one the interaction system. I'm also going to put a public Boolean in here called isPlayer, because I've put my interaction system on the player, and I want to have this option, like a lot of other adventure creator actions do, to have a check mark isPlayer to say the interaction system is on the player. And the next one we're going to need is a full body biped effector. Now in order to get that, we're going to have to also include root motion.finalIK. Now we can get the full body biped effector, and we'll call this one effector. So we have the interaction system and the effector going back to the interaction system. This is the effector. This is the interaction system. We're also going to need a variable for the interaction object, and that is, of course, the script that the object that has the interaction object script on it. So for that one, we will use another game object, and I'm going to call this one interaction object. And the final variable that we need is an interrupt to let us know if we can interrupt the current action or not. So we'll do a public bool interrupt. Okay, so those are the public variables that we are going to use. And going back to the adventure creator tutorial on creating a custom action, now that we have gotten our variables defined, we're ready to move on to the show GUI function starting from line 72. So we're going to go down here to show GUI, and action specific inspector GUI code goes here. Now the first variable I'm going to draw is going to be the isPlayer. So for a basic Boolean, we can reference this gravity style, and I'm going to paste this in. We want to toggle for the is player, and it's going to be called interaction system on player. And then we're going to need to check to see if that's true or false. So I'm going to say if is player, and if that's the case, we're automatically going to set the interaction system to kickstarter.player.gameObject. Now, kickstarter.player is just getting the adventure creator player, and then we're getting the game object. Because if you remember the interaction system itself, we're actually getting is actually a game object, and that'll make more sense later. And I'm going to get rid of this this code here, that comment, so we don't have to scroll so much. Now back to show GUI. We're going to say if it is the player, then interaction system is player kickstarter player.gameObject. So if the interaction system is not on the player, then we need to find that, and we'll start with this game object here, because you can see they're getting a game object in the tutorial. So instead of object to effect, I want, of course, to be the interaction system, and I want to get the game object of interaction system, type of game object, and we'll just call this one interaction system. Alright, and the next one I want to pick is the full body biped effector. So that is effector. We'll say effector is equal to full body biped effector, and we're going to do an editor GUI layout, and editor GUI layout dot enum pop-up, and we'll put some text in here, full body biped, and then we're just going to put a we're going to save that, of course, to the effector variable. And the last one that we need is the interaction object. Now the interaction object is going to be really similar to the interaction system because they're both game objects. And so the interaction, we want to change this to object, is equal to game object, editor GUI layout object field, interaction object. And this needs to be interaction object, type of game object. Alright, switching back to the Adventure Creator tutorial, now that we have scripted the show GUI function, we also need to set the actions header at the set label function. So let's go to the set label function. Here it is. So we'll keep the label pretty simple. We'll just start out blank, and then once you've assigned an interaction object, then we can make the label say, start with the space, add the effector, add a space on, and then add the interaction object dot name, and we'll return that. So it won't say anything if an object is not assigned. We could make it say something like add an interaction object, but we'll just keep it simple. And switching back to the Adventure Creator tutorial, the next part would be the run function. So on the run function, we need to do our code and then return 0f. So let's go back to the script, up to the run function. I'm going to delete this part, and we just want to do a couple checks first. We want to say if there's an interaction object and an interaction system. So make sure that these two variables have been populated. Then we're going to get the actual interaction system script from Final IK. So we'll call this one interaction system script, and that is going to be equal to our interaction system here dot get component interaction system. Alright, and we're going to do the same exact thing for the interaction object. We're going to say interaction object is equal to interaction object script. Interaction object dot get component interaction object. So because when we save the reference to these, we're just referencing the game objects. So now we need to go get the actual interaction system script and the actual interaction object script from Final IK. And now we're going to do another check here and make sure that those exist. So if the interaction system script and the interaction object script, we can continue. And I'm going to put the interaction system check. Okay, so as long as it found an interaction system and an interaction object, we can continue. And at this point, we just need to make a call to the interaction system where we say start interaction. Start interaction is going to want to take a couple of variables. We can see that it needs the effector type, the interaction object, and a Boolean interrupt. So we just need the effector, the interaction object, which is the interaction object script, and it also needs a Boolean for the interrupt, which we've saved to interrupt. And now that has called that line, we are going to return 0, just as the Adventure Creator tutorial tells us to. And the next thing we're going to need to do is make sure that we have saved this script to a folder where it's set to the custom action script in Adventure Creator. So now that I have completed scripting, we're going to go to the actions. I think it was an actions list, and here it is: action, final IK, start interaction. I'm going to move this into this actions custom folder, and if the custom folder is not there, create it, or make a folder that you want to, or anywhere you want. We just need to make sure we go to the Adventure Creator, and we can see if we go to the actions tab, we could go to the custom action scripts folder, and we've set that to the same folder that we've put the script into. So I'm going to go into over here. Let's select an object. In order to make this work properly, again, it needs to have interaction object script, so I'm just going to copy it from this one and paste it onto this one. So now I have the interaction object script from Final IK. And the other thing that this will use is the hand position. And again, this is from the Final IK video tutorial. Make sure to reference that to know exactly how to set this up. But it's pretty simple. All I need to do is find my object, and there is a duplicate of your character's hand. You'll notice that from their tutorial. So I'm just going to duplicate that and make it a child. So I'm going to move it here. We'll just put it to 0, 0, 0. And you'll notice this is the same exact thing that you'll see from the Final IK tutorial, except my character's hand is a little funny. But you just want to position the hand where he would grab onto that object at. So I think the hand's going to grab on something like this. That looks good. So I've set up the position of the hand, and it also has a interaction object script on it. So now we're ready to, of course, add a use interaction from Adventure Creator. And I'm just going to create one in the scene for this example. And so let's go ahead and select that. It's right here. And let's open this up to edit it. Now we should have an action type custom. Now I have two of them because I already wrote the script before the tutorial. But the one I think that we wrote is this one. We could check by going into the final IK start interaction script, which closed on me because I moved it. So I'll have to go to my actions, custom final IK start interaction. Here we go. This is the script we've been working in, and I can see that I've named it like this. Now it has all the spaces in it. So back here, we'll make sure we selected the one that we're doing the tutorial on, and here we are. Interaction system on player, true or false, or we can assign a game object with an interaction system such as the player himself. So we could drag the player into here because he has final IK interaction system script. Full body biped effector. What body part do we want to choose from? And I'm going to go with the right hand. And then the interaction object, that of course is going to be the object with the interaction object script. And as a hot spot, I'm going to turn off the yellow cube so we can see what's going on here. And the next one, back to our action list, is the interaction object. We're going to populate that. Now, let's see what happens if we press play. The player's not going to walk up to it because we haven't told him how. So on the Adventure Creator walk to marker, I'm going to create one, and I'm going to tell him player action walk to marker and face after moving. So now this walk to marker, which is right here, we'll just put it down here on the ground. And the player will walk up to that and grab it. Let's hit play and see what happens. Holy cross. The player walks over here, reaches out and picks it up. So he definitely has done the final IK action that is on that game object. Looking at it, we can see that it does this position curve, and at 0.5 it does a pickup. And of course the player has still picked up that item. So our action is completely working. There's a couple things that we should do to make this action even better. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is go to the Adventure Creator tutorial, go to the next part here, which is getting the custom action to work with assets. Because right now, this will only work with objects that are in the same exact scene as it, and it won't work with any prefabs. So to get that to work, we're going to need to define a constant ID for each variable that may not be in the same scene of it as it. So in this script, there's two of them that are candidates. That's the interaction system and the interaction object. Those are both game objects that could be prefabs or not in the same scene. So for these two objects, we're going to need to define, as the Adventure Creator says, a constant ID. So for the two constant IDs, these need to be public integers. So I'm going to go back to the script up to here, and we're going to define a public integer, and we'll name this one just like Adventure Creator says, constant ID. And the thing is that we're going to need two of these, so I'm going to say constant ID, and there's probably a better naming convention, but I'll say interaction system. And then we're also going to want a constant ID for the interaction object. So now that we have two constant IDs defined, we need to do this code here, like it says in the show GUI function. So down to the show GUI function. Once we've defined an interaction system, we're going to need to call this, now the constant ID needs an underscore interaction system, because we're doing the interaction system right now. So this is field to ID interaction system and constant ID underscore IS. Again, we're going to replace this with interaction system and constant ID IS. We need to do the same thing for the interaction object. So we're going to say interact constant ID IO for interaction object. Field to ID interaction object. Constant ID IO. Interaction object is equal to ID to field. Interaction object constant ID IO true. So we followed the tutorial here, and we could see that the next part is we need to go to the assign values function, and we need to assign the file. So this is public void assign values. We should find that here, and if it's not here, we'll just go ahead and make it. So I'm going to take this whole function and paste it just above the run function, override public void assign values, and we're going to need to call this both for the interaction system and the interaction object. So we're going to say interaction system is assign file a constant ID interaction system and comma interaction system, and the same thing's going to happen for the interaction object. We're going to call assign file IO interaction object. So now this should work with prefabs, and we could see that working if we go to the action list editor, and it's going to reload the script. And if I turn off this game object, you'll see that the interaction object got its recorded constant ID. And then if I turn off the player's game object, we'll see it records a constant ID for that one as well. So that part is working, and there's one final thing we need to get, which is getting the custom action to work with parameters, because there's a chance we want to use this as a action list run, which means that we're going to need to make it work with parameters. Now, in order to do that, we're going to follow the tutorial again. So we're going to add this public integer perimeter ID back to the script. We're going to add a public integer perimeter ID, and we're going to need one for the interaction system, and we're also going to need one for the interaction object. And those are going to be equal to -1. And next up, we have to go to the show GUI function and add this list action parameters. So show GUI, this won't work until we do a systems using system collection generic. And now we have the show GUI with the list action parameters. And next up, we have to call a line of code like this to make it show the GUI correctly. So we're going to go to the show GUI function, and then the isPlayer is fine. We'll start with that, and then we'll say if it is the player, then it's the Kickstarter player. And the next thing we'll need to do is, if it's not using isPlayer, then before we do this interaction system, we need to check to see if it wants to use a parameter instead. So right here we'll say, I'm going to paste in the code which is from the tutorial right here, and that is parameter ID is equal to this. So this is of course for the interaction system. That's equal to action.choose parameter GUI game object to effect, and we'll just name this one interaction system, and that is the parameter ID is, and the parameter type is game object. Now by default this is -1, but if there are some parameters, so if parameter ID is greater than or equal to 0, which we're getting from right here, so let's just copy this code. And I'm going to paste that in here. So if the parameter ID is greater than or equal to 0, so that's the interaction system, then the constant ID for the interaction system is equal to 0, and object to effect is null. So the object to effect, of course, is the interaction system. And then we'll do an else, because if there are no parameters, then we just want to go ahead and default back to the normal show GUI for the interaction system. Now the effector's fine, there's nothing we need to do with this, but we're going to need to go through the same thing for the interaction object, and so that's really easy. We're just going to say the parameter ID IO for interaction object is equal to action, choose parameter interaction object, and then parameters parameter ID IO, parameter type game object, and we're going to say the same thing as up here. If parameter ID IO is greater than 0 and constant ID IO is equal to 0, and the interaction object is equal to null. Otherwise, we'll just do the regular show GUI for the interaction object. And I've just now realized that we completely forgot to add the Boolean in for the interrupt. So we need to do that now before it's done drawing the GUI. So we're going to say interrupt is equal to editor GUI layout dot toggle, and we'll just say interrupt, and the Boolean that we're affecting is interrupt. So going back to the Adventure Creator tutorial, we are almost done. We've done the proper thing in the show GUI function, and so finally we need to update the assign values function to accept parameters. We need to add this to the assign values function. So back up here to assign values, we're going to put the list action parameters, and then we need to make sure that it looks like this. So the assign file needs to add in a couple of things, 2 variables. Boom, right at the beginning we're going to put them here, and it's parameters and then parameter ID for the underscore interaction system. And we'll want to copy the same exact thing for the interaction object, except that is an underscore IO. So now that we have done that, we have got to the end of the action. It's now complete. It's going to work with game objects, prefabs, and parameters. Let's take a look at what we have created. It's going to take a minute to compile, and then it's going to update our UI. So I can choose a game object that has a interaction system on it, and I can drag and drop that into here. If it's a prefab or it's not in the same scene, then it's going to record its constant ID, so it's going to remember it, and it's still going to work. And the other thing is we could do here is we could say interaction system is on player. In that case, all the options go away, and we can also select which full body biped effector. So what part of the body we want this to affect. We can select which object we want to interact with. So that, of course, is any object that has a interaction object script on it. So I could drag this in, and same thing with the player. If it's a prefab or if it's not in the scene, it's going to record a constant ID, so it will still work. And we have an option to allow us to interrupt any other action that Final IK might be doing. And now I should be able to press play, and if the player clicks onto the item, he's going to walk right up to it, reach out, and pick it up. Now I'm going to show how to use this with variables. So let's say we wanted to create a new action list. So I'm going to create an adventure creator action list and open this up. And we wanted to do the custom Final IK start interaction, and we want the player to of course we're going to say the interaction system is on the player, and we're going to affect the right hand, and we want it to interact with this object. And then after that, we want it to wait for 0.6 seconds. And after that, I wanted to do a character animate, and I want to animate the player. And the parameter that I want to affect is on the character's animator. So if I select the player, I can see that he has a animation toggle called put item in bag, and if that transition gets toggled, he does this action where he reaches with his hand over towards his bag on his hip and just puts the item in the bag. So just a real simple animation. In fact, this could be animated with Final IK, but I want to show how to combine Final IK with standard Mecanum animations. So he has this just simple animation where he's moving his arm over towards his hip. It's called put item in bag. We have a boolean we have a toggle in Mecanum. So on my character, I'm going to say parameter to effect. That, of course, is put item in bag, and that is a trigger. So after that, I want it to add the item to the player's inventory. So if I were to go to the adventure creator and go to inventory, create a new item, and we'll call this one the same as the item that I'm working with. There should be a texture for that. And so now we've defined an adventure creator inventory item for that. So I'm going to say inventory, and we're going to say add or remove, add the Holy Cross, and let's see what happens when we press play, except we haven't told anything to actually use this action yet. So on this one, let's select that item in the scene, and then on its inspector for the hotspot, we're going to say interaction source is an asset file, and that will allow us to drag in this action list that we've created. So when we click on it, it's going to run this. It's going to do the Final IK interaction, wait for 0.6 seconds, so just after he's picked up the item, and then it's going to run the put item in bag animation and add the item to the inventory. So let's see how this looks. The player, click on the item, the player's going to walk to it, reach out, pick it up, put it into his bag, and the last thing we should do is probably make it disappear, because it shouldn't be in his hand anymore. So we're going to go to the action list here, and we'll just say object, and we'll say remove, and the object to the delete is going to be, of course, that item. It's going to record its constant ID. And let's see what happens one more time. Over here to pick up the item, reach out, pick it up, put it into his bag, and now we can see we have it in our inventory. Now the problem with this is that I've made this action list and it's only going to work for the Holy Cross object. And I want to make an action that's going to do all of this stuff, and I could just call that one time and it will work for any object. So to make that work, that's where we're going to use variables. So I'm going to name this action, I'm going to rename it to Pick Up Holy Cross, and now I'm going to create a new Adventure Creator action list, and this one is just going to be called Pick Up Item, and we could call this one Template. And what I'm going to do is just start by copying all these actions. So right click, copy selected, and now let's go to our new action, and I'm going to paste all of the copied actions, and we'll get rid of this delay. We'll do an auto arrange so it lines those up nicely. And these two, let's move them up here where I can see them better. So if I want to separate these into variables, I'm going to need a game object variable here, and I don't need a variables for any of these. I need a variable here for the inventory item and this variable, but that's the same one as this one. So what I'm going to do is click on Show Properties, and we're going to go to Use Parameters, and I'm going to say create a new parameter. The first one is a game object, which is the interaction object, and there's one more parameter, which is the inventory item. So this is an inventory item, and the interaction object is a game object. That's all we need. I'm going to go back to the show actions, and because we've scripted our action to work correctly with parameters, if I say interaction system is not on the player, there's an option to use a parameter for the interaction system. And I'm going to show one little problem here. If we select this interaction object as the interaction system, which we don't want to do, I just want to use this as an example, and then I select inventory system is on player and I deselect it, you'll see that it's still set to the parameter. So a real simple fix for that is just to come to the show GUI and to say if you selected the player, we just want to set the parameter ID for the interaction system back to -1, which is what it is when it starts. So now we could see back over here, if we were to select interaction system is on player and now deselect it, the parameter has cleared itself. So because in my case the interaction system is on the player, so I'm going to keep that option on. We want the right hand, and the interaction object, we're going to use the parameter. So there's the interaction object, and we want it to interrupt, and then it's going to wait for 0.6 seconds. It's going to run the mechanism animation. The inventory item it's going to add is going to be a parameter. That's the inventory item. And then the object we want it to delete, of course, is an interaction object, the same parameter that we passed in here. So now that I've set this up with its own template that accepts variables, I could go back to the Holy Cross, and I'm just going to delete everything. We'll go ahead and delete those. And now we just need to call one action here, which is action list run. It's an action list that is an asset file. It is the pickup item template, and it needs to know what the interaction object is, and it will even it could even be a prefab. So that's what this constant ID is for. So in this case, this is the pickup item Holy Cross. So we're going to say this is the item we want to pick up, and it says what inventory item is that. That of course is the Holy Cross. And let's hit play. However, I want to make sure that when we select, when we click on the Holy Cross in Adventure Creator and do an interaction with the hotspot, that it's running the pick up Holy Cross action, which it is. And of course that is the one that's just running one action. Alright, perfect. So let's hit play. Click on the Holy Cross, and the player will reach out, pick that up, put it into his bag, and now we have it in our inventory. Alright, we have wrapped up this tutorial. There was quite a bit covered. I hope it helps you out in making your own actions. There's a link in the description to where you can find a copy of this script, so you can add this script to your project if you haven't followed the entire tutorial. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.